So hi, my name is Åsa Grimberg. I'm working as a researcher and teacher at the Department of Plant Breeding at SLU in Alnarp. I'm working with seeds, that is one of the major raw materials for our food. And more precisely, I'm doing research on the genetic regulation of seed quality. Today I'm out here in the field outside Svalöv and I'm harvesting Faba bean seeds of a lot of different genotypes. Actually, it's 250 different genotypes. And I will tell you more about how our project hopefully can contribute to an increased cultivation of legumes and the use of those in food in Sweden. Okay, I would like to start to thank the organizer for giving me the opportunity to share with you some of the activities that are ongoing in our Faba bean project at SLU that started in 2019. This project is financed by SLU Grogrund, which is a center for breeding of food crops, which is based on the needs that were described in the Swedish government's food strategy a few years ago. So I want to start with reminding us that we are fully dependent on plants' ability to convert solar energy into chemical energy in the form of starch, oil, protein, and sugars, which are usually stored in seeds or in tubers. And this, as we know, is the raw material for all our food, no matter if we first give it to the animals or if we eat it directly. And the proportions and also the quality of these storage products in seeds of different crops or in different varieties of the same crop will determine the end use of this crop. And here in the photos you can see some of the crops that I'm working with in my research. It's faba bean, quinoa, and oat, and below you can see the seeds of the respective crops. And my research interest, as I told in this introduction movie, is in the genetic regulation of seed quality and how we can use such knowledge to breed for improved plants that we need. So our project regarding Faba bean, we aim to develop breeding tools for Faba bean to secure a sustainable primary production in the future. If we look at the plant protein situation in Europe, I guess this is well known for many in this audience, but we can see that a very high share, 93%, is used for feed and only 7% is used for food. And more than half of it, 63% of all this used plant protein is imported. And we know that we are highly dependent on especially soybean import. This you can see by these light green parts of the bars. Or this is for the soybean here. So legumes in Europe is only grown on approximately 3% of the arable land. And I should say that this figures is from an e-report some years ago. So we don't grow very much legumes in Europe yet, but this is at the same time that we know that we need to change how we eat. We will most probably in the future need to eat less meat and more vegetables, as Cornelia was talking about also before. So these words here is from an Eat Lancet Commission summer report a year ago. And here in this report, the legumes are really mentioned, that we really need to eat more legumes. So that means we need to grow more legumes. So what are the benefits? Where is this connection between a more sustainable planet and eating more legumes? It's the nitrogen fixing ability that is very important, of course, to mention. This is through the rhizobium symbiosis between the legumes and this bacteria that produces nodules in the root system. And this will fertilize the soil for the coming crop. So these plants does not need to be fertilized much. Another benefit is to break the disease cycles that we have in our very cereal intensive agriculture. We grow a lot of cereals today in agriculture. So by growing more legumes, we will increase our self-sufficiency of plant proteins. And if we eat more legumes directly, instead of first giving them to our animals, and we can decrease our meat consumption. It's also, we have to say, that's very trendy in healthy food, at least for some consumer groups. And I think you also know that the market has been really exploded with different food products based on legumes, and there has been big market investments done the last years. So this is where our product comes into focus. Our vision is to meet our country's demand for protein-based food and feed products by increasing the domestic production of high-qualitative protein crops. The participants are SLU, and then I'm working at the Department of Plant Breeding, and I have several colleagues taking part in this project. It's Lantmännen and Agriculture, it's former Lyckeby, now Sveriges stärkelseproducenter, and also Kalmar Ölands trädgårdsprodukter that we'll talk later today. As I mentioned, so our product is working very close to the primary production. So if we should eat more legumes, we need really to produce them. And then we also need plant breeding. And for the ones in the audience who's not very has not been working much with plant breeding or know what it is, just to very briefly mention what is it. This is one definition. It can be called the science, art, and business of improving plants for human benefit. And if we just remind us what plant breeding in the most historical form, we have our crops today looking like this, for example, when it comes to tomato or maize, even look much bigger than this. And here on the side, you can see their wild ancestors. So this is in the most historical form of plant breeding. But we should say that plant breeding is a continuous process to meet the current and future needs and challenges that we are facing. And today we're using more delicate tools, usually including looking at DNA patterns in plant individuals to find the best ones for our purposes, and that we then can cross together and so on. Okay, so why did we choose Faba bean and invest in breeding for our country? Well, among the different legumes, Faba bean has a high protein content, around 30%, in combination with high potential for high yields. A mean value for Sweden today is around 3.5 tons per hectares, but in other parts of Europe, you actually can reach 7 tons per hectare. Plant breeding of Faba bean has been absent since the 19th, so there's a gap which we can fill. And also we believe there's a high potential for increased growth in our Swedish climate. This is showing some figures on Faba bean cultivation a few years ago. The darker green, the higher percentage of the arable land is used for Faba bean cultivation. And we can see that at most it's 2 to 3% of the arable land in some regions that is grown with Faba bean. We can also see that it is possible to grow it from south to south of Norrland. The majority is still used for animal feed, and I believe that will be probably also in the future, but hopefully a transition into using it more into food. We believe that new varieties that are better adjusted for food can give an increased economic value for the farmer who can sell it to food purposes instead, and also an experienced increased value for the consumer who can buy food products based on domestic produced legumes. One challenge in our Swedish climate is that this crop has a very long growth period. So it means that the more north we go, high risk that you cannot reach maturity before harvest. And there's also risk for drought. These crops, or this crop is sensitive for drought during the flowering period, which was, of course, very much clear during 2018. Another interesting thing to mention is that so we really want early varieties to shorten the growth period, but also one interesting product can be to harvest the fresh seeds when they're green and then freeze them. So it would be a harvest technique as we use with the green peas. Then we eat them as a vegetable instead. And actually, I should note that there are other initiatives in Sweden going on right now regarding that type of product. So very briefly, I always think it's very interesting to think of the history of our crops, and actually me and a colleague are putting together a course in this topic on different crops. So if you're interested, please, you can contact me. It will be next summer. But faba bean is one of the earliest domesticated crops of Near Eastern agricultural systems. And actually, in some regions and periods, its cultivation was banned. Here on the picture, you can see the Greek philosopher Pythagoras. So he banned his followers from eating faba. It was associated to decay. But in other regions and periods, it was highly regarded for the benefits. And actually, there was a big feast, Fabaria, that was celebrated in ancient Rome. And that was in celebration to Carna, which was a goddess of vital organs and health. So it has been different views on this crop. In our project, we are developing a breeding program. This is initially based on the best available commercial varieties. This work is done at Lantmännen. We are assembling a seed collection. Right now we have 380 genotypes from gene banks all over the world and commercial breeders. So this is supposed to show high genetic diversity, because that's what we're interested in. We will characterize part of the seed collection in field during 2 years and 2 locations in Sweden. And we have just been amplifying this gene bank material now in the field outside Svalöv, actually. We will genotype the same seed collection, and that means we will look at DNA patterns. Then we will connect all this data, and by doing that, we can develop breeding tools that is called genetic markers for specific traits. We also are doing some in-depth studies of specific traits of interest, for example, plant architecture, and that can be important to get a more homogeneous maturation of the beans, which can be important for these green, fresh harvested beans. So what we want to do, we can call it tap off the genetic diversity of faba bean to breeders and farmers, and then finally to the consumers. So when we think about genetic diversity, that's something we really need to be able to do plant breeding. And in faba bean, here is one example of the high genetic diversity available. Here are 6 varieties from Norgene, and this is showing different seed phenotypes of faba bean. We have the big flat seeds down here, which is typically called bundbana, typically is big flat seeds. And also we have some other varieties with more round seeds and in other colors. But we will not, of course, only look at seed phenotypes, even though that is very important if we're going to have them in the field. Traits of interest that we will characterize in this seed collection will be yield, of course, very important for the economy. We'll look at earliness, as I mentioned, that's very important for our country. Seed types, I mentioned. Seed quality, we will do a lot of seed quality analysis. We will do protein, starch, and oil content, sometimes also quality. And the nutritional factors that Cornelia just talked very much about is important in faba bean, especially one specific among the legume crops is convicin vicin, which some people cannot eat because they cannot metabolize it. Flower color, there's already white flowering varieties on the market. Those are low in tannins in the seed coat, in the peel. So if it's low in tannin, it's better suitable for feed for some animals, because tannins can decrease the nutrient uptake. However, if we go for food, we can all probably afford to take that tannins away, because we can afford to peel these seeds. Plant architecture, I mentioned, how they grow is also important. We must look at height, branching, and if they are determinate or not. That means if they stop to flower, because faba bean has one problem, they never want to stop flower. So you will get beans in different stages. And of course, very important that affects the yield, that's resistance to diseases, insects. We have very much increasing problem with the just one example of what type of diversity we have in our seed collection. So here we can see seed sizes in seed length of 179 of the different genotypes we have. Here we have a group called the major ones. These are the having fairly big seeds, and then we have the one with middle-sized seeds and the one with minor, very small seeds. So achievements this far. So the breeding program has started. So there are seeds amplified from the first crosses made, and the seeds are sent to different parts of the world to use the counter season to amplify seeds. We have put together this seed collection, and 250 of them have been amplified in the field. So we have been harvesting the last weeks now, actually. We are developing screening protocols for field trials to screen for all these different traits. We are doing the molecular work for so-called precision markers for these determinant plants. We're also planning for the field trials the 2 coming years. And I also want to mention that one achievement, I think, is that we have this collaboration in Grogrund with researchers, breeders, primary producers, and food industry to define the breeding goals in our crops together. So I think this is my final slide, just to show some of the ongoing activities. Here on top, you see our field trial. And yes, it looks a bit strange. All the plants we needed to be covered with a plastic bag, because Faba is actually a partially cross-pollinating species. So to keep them pure, we needed to cover them. That was quite a bit of work, but now we are happy to have harvested quite some seeds. We also had big problems with birds, I have to say. Some doves were taking many of the seeds. In the middle row, you see some of the lab activities ongoing. We have our students, our PhD student Hanna and another student doing molecular work. Here we see this type of determinant plant, which actually knows how to stop flower and put pods also in the top of the plant, which can give a more homogeneous maturation. We also are having found very interesting mutants present from the previous breeder in Svalöv, Jan Sjödin, who produced a mutation population. So here we see a dwarf mutant, actually. So we're looking into such as well. And in the bottom, there's a photo from our team visit at Kalmar Ölands trädgårdsprodukter, where we learned about their production of different types of beans. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And here are the people that are listed that are involved in the project. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Åsa. Any questions for Åsa? Yes, Robin? No, that was a clap. Sorry. Any questions? Yes, then I would like to ask, you mentioned that there was plant breeding ongoing earlier from up to 1990, and then there is a new breeding project now. So are there any differences in the traits that you are working on now compared to the traits that the earlier project was working on?
I think typically what they aimed for then was a good seed size and shape, which means small and round seeds so that they did not get stuck in the sowing machines, and also earlier varieties. And usually early varieties have come from Finland. They grow some Faba beans, so there has been some material from there. So these were the 2 focus traits. Now, of course, we also want early material. As I said, it's still a very important trait. We look, of course, at yield will be very important. That's always very important. I think one increasing problem, as I mentioned, has been this burn SMEs. So if we would find any differences in genotypes there, it would be very interesting. And I also think that in this Grogrund project, we now also have the possibility to really see if we can find, which I think would be very interesting, to see if we really see any seed quality differences. It might be that there are varieties with different starch qualities. There even might be some with slightly higher oil content. As someone mentioned, soybean, for example, is kind of a dual crop. It's high in protein, but there are also varieties with high oil. That would be interesting if that would be useful for the industry, for the food producers and so on.
There are a question in the chat, Åsa.
Let's see. So what was the, no, that was the old one.
Oh, yeah, that's.
Did I miss it?
No.
Yeah, I have not made any germination studies yet. No.
No. It was just mentioned here.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah.
So one question, you mentioned a little bit about the end uses that might be of interest, green harvest, and now you talked a little bit about the oil content. So can you see something now, some end uses of fava bean already, or?
I think that has been discussed with some of the participants here as well. I think to produce flour from these pulses, I guess I'm not a food producer, but I know others are very interested in such a product, which I guess can be used for many different purposes. We should also say that one very much increasing product on the market are these vegetable burgers. There has been huge investments in using yellow peas, for example, as a raw material for burger production. Of course, that's highly processed food, but for the consumers that are interested to eat more green stuff but don't change their habits too much, I think such product can be the bridge to eat more vegetables. But I assume that others in this audience will know better what the consumers really want. And so.
Okay, thank you. I cannot see any more questions for Åsa. So yes, Susanna?
Yes, I have one. Concerning traits of interest, are you working with the taste of the beans?
I should be honest, we have it on the list. We would really like to see if we could make any sensory taste studies. I have to admit right now, we are not sure if the budget will allow all the way to that, but we hope that it will be some taste studies in the end when we have made all the field studies. That is of the primary importance for our breeding program right now. But it's of course, taste is interesting. I also think that, for example, for these products like the green, fresh frozen harvested beans, the taste of fava bean can be much more interesting than soybeans. But I think for the bulk products, I can imagine that a neutral taste and color would be a raw material that can be used for many different products.
Yes, I can see Cornelia waving.
And please, Cornelia, unmute.
Yeah, I can just let you know, Åsa, that we've done some studies with Egyptian fresh vegetable faba beans, and I can send you some paper regarding that. I'm just preparing a mail for you. And they are eaten in Egypt very traditional, like we eat normal green trädgårdsböna, and they are very nice and mild, and so it's a good vegetable to eat.
It is. I really like to make to have this. You can buy them in the freezers in the stores. Yes. Typically or usually they are not from Sweden, but from these other initiatives that I talked about, there have been some production, very small one, but in Sweden. But it's very nice to have in salads with some cheese and stuff.
It definitely has potential, and you can use it instead of sugar snaps or eller.
Yep. And I just want to add there, so there is an ongoing project right now. It was originally run by Innovatum in Trollhättan. So actually, for several years' time, they've tried this. There have been challenges with the harvesting technique and so for this green, fresh, frozen harvest. But actually, they had some trials this year with different varieties as well.
And one last mention with respect to the favism, which you also mentioned. It is true that this is an enzyme defect which some humans have, but in Europeans this enzyme defect is very, very seldom. So it needs to be marked, of course, that people who have favism don't eat these products, but it is for the broad population not a problem at all to eat faba beans and have problems with favism.
Yeah. And anyhow, it's of course an interesting breeding trait to get as low content of these compounds as possible. And actually, there are varieties that are said to be low. I'm not sure if they're always low, but
No.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.